With all the new technology and the abundance of information on the web, you would think that buying or selling or understanding the real estate market would be easier than ever. But ask yourself one question. Now that you've done your homework and you think you know what's going on, what do you do next? Good morning, everyone, and that is the question that we try to address here on this blog every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. What do you do next? And today we're going to be talking directly about that. We're going to be talking about inspections. And inspections are probably the most emotional crux of a transaction, so we're going to get to that in a minute. I'm really excited to talk about that because inspections are probably the most vulnerable part of a transaction where there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of misperception, and so we're going to create a platform here to sort of get away, not get away, to give you some suggestions on how to make that transaction a lot easier. And that is the purpose of this blog. This blog is not designed to get the abundance of information you can get on the web about tips and preparing your house and things like that, top 10 reasons to get this loan or that loan or things like that. We get into the actual meat and bones of a transaction and talk about the things that really matter, talk about the things that can really de-stress your transaction, because real estate now has gotten actually more complicated, not less complicated. And really, some of the online apps and some of the approaches that are being put forth by Silicon Valley are actually complicating things more than making them a little smoother. So that's the purpose of this blog. We want to educate the real estate public about some of the things that can make their life a whole lot easier. We're talking about what you do next, okay? So before we get started, I want to emphasize that this is Facebook Live, and on Facebook Live, I'm encouraging you to ask questions on the air. We've been on for about 5 weeks now, and we're excited to get some input from you. Please feel free to ask a question about anything related to real estate, and we're happy to answer it. We'll be on for about probably 15 minutes or so this morning. So welcome, everyone. Okay, so let's get started. A little background. My name is Stewart Fournier. I'm an 18-year veteran of the real estate world. I've been an agent here in California for that long, and my wife and I, Randy, have been practicing for a combination of well over 35 years. We've done it all. We've done income property, we've done 31 exchange, we've done residential, we've done some commercial. That's not our emphasis, but we do commercial for our clients that have commercial. We're happy to help in that regard. But mainly we focus on residential, and that's where we have an abundance of experience that we're trying to share on the air here. So let's talk about inspections. Now, again, as I said in the beginning, inspections are the most misunderstood, emotionally wrought parts of the transaction process. But let's back it up a little bit and talk about how the inspection plays a role in your actual contract. Now, in your contract, when you are in escrow, there is some section of your contract, in fact, a lot of section of your contract refers to the ins and outs of the inspection process. What you've asked the seller is a chance to come into the house and inspect it from top to bottom, literally getting underneath the house, through the house, and on top of the house. And what you're going to do is you're going to hire a professional that does just that. Now, let's talk about who you should hire when you're going to do your inspection. The person that you should hire is someone that actually does that and only that. And that person may not necessarily be a contractor. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but the fact of the matter is most contractors are not that interested in becoming experts in inspection. They are on a different plane. They like to do building, obviously. They're advertising for much different things. House inspectors, although they are not necessarily contractors, are specifically trained and have certifications for just that, for house inspections. So you want to obviously get somebody who's certified. And by the way, real important point here is they are not state licensed for inspections themselves. They have a state license for their business, I'm sure, but there is no state license for inspectors, which is why it's really important that you choose the right inspector. And your realtor, and certainly we can as well, advise you of who some of those people are, to come check out your home or your potential home. The other thing is you want to make sure that they have E&O insurance as well. Now, inspectors need that protection because inspectors, in spite of the fact that they're very experienced and they know what they're doing in terms of looking throughout your house and finding problems, they can miss things. I've seen it happen. And what they do is, just like realtors or any other profession, they have something to back them up, and it's called E&O insurance. So make sure your inspector has two things. Number one, E&O insurance, in case there's a mistake, and we need that insurance liability. And number two, the fact that they're certified makes a big difference. So you also want to pick your own inspector. Don't let the seller pick their inspector or anybody else pick their inspector, because you want the relationship between yourself and that inspector, so that inspector is loyal to you, number one, but also is liable to you if he gets something wrong. So make sure that you pay and that you have the relationship with the inspector, because that's an important, obviously an extremely important part of the process, and you want to be covered for that. So let's get started about what actually happens in an inspection. Now, what happens in an inspection, like I said before, is they literally check everything. They check the walls, they check the electrical, they check the plumbing, they check the condition of the house, they check the attic, they check the roof, they check the light switches, they check the toilets, they check the sinks, they check the cabinets, everything from top to bottom. Your inspector has a great deal of knowledge and also is aware of some of the permits for that particular city. They're going to go through the house and say, we're not sure that's permitted. They won't be experts at the permitting process, but they will have a notion of what to do when they find stuff that's not permitted, and they will, obviously write it down for you. Now, we did my very first blog. I can't believe it's been 5 blogs ago already. I talked at length about the permit process. So if you get a chance and you want to know about permits and how they work, intrinsic in the transaction, and what your responsibilities are, please see my very first video where I talk about this at length. Now, it takes generally, let's just use an example, your typical, say, 1,000 square foot to 4,500 square foot house. It takes anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 to 4 hours, depending on the size of the house, for the inspector to go through the process. And what you will get at the end of it is a report that shows everything that they have found, or everything they think is wrong, and everything that is potentially going to be a problem with your house. Now, this is where it gets very complicated and very emotional for people. Most people, and myself included, even after years of doing this, don't necessarily know everything about every aspect of a house. We've been doing this for a long time, so there's very few things we don't know about or haven't run into. But when you're buying a house for the first time, or even the second or third time, the inspector will find things that are kind of scary. They can be very wordy and sound expensive. And the thing is that most inspectors are not going to tell you or advise you on the actual cost of something they might find. They may give you a general idea of how expensive something's going to be, but they don't want to be held liable for giving exact quotes. Remember, they are not contractors. They are there to simply be almost an objective point of view as to what's wrong or right with the house. And inherent in that is they want to stay away from suggesting anything cost-wise. So that's something that you are going to have to do on your own. Hopefully your realtor can help you with that. We've been, like I said, doing this for so long. It's pretty easy for us to give a generalization. But it obviously is always the most responsible thing to do, to go out and actually get quotes from different contractors on things that are discovered during the inspection process. And that can be a little arduous, but in the long run, it's the best thing you can do. And it's one of the reasons you're given those, remember, 17 days to investigate and find out what's going on. So let's get back to the contract a little bit. Now, in the contract, there is in California at least, there is a law that basically says all houses in California are sold as is. Now, as is a misunderstood term, and I'm going to get into that in another video about what that actually means. But for the purposes of this video, let me just reassure you that no questions yet? I'm going to take this off. Getting a little obnoxious. Okay. Please. I'm here live. Ask me a question. In the state of California, basically, we agree that it's buyer beware, because the buyer gets plenty of time to do the inspection, to come in to see what's wrong, and there's no implying that you're selling a particular house, respective of repairs or respective of problems or respective of permits. The only thing that's required of a house, whether it's a $100,000 house or a $30 million house, are three things. Number one, that water heater has to be strapped. That's California law. Number two, there has to be carbon dioxide detectors, and there has to be smoke detectors. Outside of that, you're completely on your own. So that's why this process is as arduous as it is. You're given the opportunity to do all the inspecting you can do, but then it's your responsibility to move on. Now, a seller does not have to agree to repair any of the things an inspector may find. Now, if you find that objectionable, which most people would, you can just simply excuse yourself from the contract. So most sellers agree, and their listing agents have told them prior to going on the market, there will be an inspection and there will be things found to be faulty with your home. That's just the way it works. Even new construction. We've had situations where brand new houses, brand new construction, actually have a laundry list of problems that are even longer than an older house, a house that's 30 or 40 years old. We've seen it happen many times. So sellers, be aware of the fact that even though you've done a terrific job of keeping your house up to date, you've fixed all the repairs that ever came along, you had contractors come in, still there will be things that inspector is going to find, and it's inevitable. I've never seen an inspection that didn't have a number of things on it. The point is, though, that all these things can be resolved easily. Now, what are your choices? Again, you can terminate the contract, or you can do the more responsible thing and realize that all houses have problems, whether they're seen or unseen until the moment there's an inspection. That happens all the time. And what you can do then is simply get a sense of what the expense is for your list of items that the inspector found and figure out how much they cost. Again, sometimes that list gets a little intimidating, and some things that sound very, very expensive turn out to be very inexpensive. And I want to give you an example. I'll read something now. This is very typical. We find this actually happen in almost every inspection I've ever had for the number of years that I've done this. But let me read it to you. It says, a drip leg, or sometimes called a sediment trap, prevents any sediment, debris, condensation from entering the burner valve. As an example, see figure 7. So they actually took a picture of this. Is normally regulated for gas appliance connections. The water heater and furnace should be investigated for a drip leg. Suggests reviewing the manufacturer's specifications and conforming installation. Now, that sounds expensive, right? That sounds like it's bringing the plumber in, putting the parts, figuring out where this actual condensation is coming from. It sounds like a big deal. Well, that whole repair is probably about $80. Literally all that is, and I'm not going to say this officially because I'm not an inspector and I'm not a contractor, but literally all that is a little repair work on the water heater. I think it's an extra pipe they connect, and you're done. So there's an example of when you get the report, please don't be overwhelmed by the 16, 17, maybe even 30 or 40 items that are going to be on there, because it's the inspector's job to tell you absolutely everything that's wrong with that house, whether it seems like a small item or not. Remember, they're liable to you. So it's a really arduous process to go through. All right, so now that you have gotten your inspection and you've reviewed the items on the inspection, the next thing to do is to get a sense of how much it's going to cost. And 9 times out of 10, again, as I said, it's not as expensive as you think it is. And you get a sense of what it's going to cost. And you simply go back to the seller and you say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, as you know, we did our inspection and now we'd like you to take a look at the list that we found. And we'd like you to review. And if you need a separate, you can certainly call our inspector, but if you need a separate inspection, please feel free to bring your inspector in. And if there's a dispute, maybe we can work it out in terms of the experts deciding what the issue is. Again, that's the beauty of our contract in California. It allows for all this negotiation. It allows for cooperation. It allows for there to be a resolve of things that you may think are monumental that turn out to be very small. And that's probably the biggest hint I can give you in transactions. Always look for more information so you can find out exactly what you're dealing with. Now, what you do is you simply get a dollar amount and you suggest two things. You suggest to the seller that either they fix it or they take what's called a credit in escrow towards the repairs themselves as a whole. Now, we suggest you do the latter. And the reason that we suggest you do the latter is that it's better to have your people come in and make the repairs so they're answerable to you, as opposed to the seller's repair person who you don't know and who you might have questions. Sellers, we suggest you also take the credit for that same reason. If the seller decides to fix it, there could be an interpretation as to how it was done. If the seller simply takes a credit, there's less chance of interpretation, less chance for conflict, and things get run a lot smoother. So we always suggest that you actually take the credit. If you don't want to, that's fine. Seller, if you think it's an easy repair, maybe just a simple screwdriver and a nut or something that fixes the problem, that's understandable. Because don't forget, at the end of the transaction, the buyer gets a chance to come in and see if the repairs were completed. Again, that's a very touchy subject as well. I'll get into at another time. Now, let's assume that there's a major problem. Let's assume, for example, that there's a foundation problem, which in general is probably the most expensive repair that can happen to a home in general. And let's say, for example, there's a foundation problem that's $20,000, $30,000. Well, what could be scarier than that, right? You bought a house, you had no idea, and the seller probably had no idea that there was a major foundation problem, and it sounds like things are going in the wrong direction. Well, here's a case where, again, best thing to do is sit back, get a real expert opinion as to what the exact expense is, because the seller, remember, is going to have to disclose that. And by the way, the seller has to disclose everything that's on an inspection report if a transaction falls out of escrow and the next buyer comes along. That buyer is going to be under the same purview, or I don't know if purview is the right word, but under the same, in the same position to see absolutely that's everything that's wrong with the house. So it really does pay not to get excited, for the seller to not get excited, because the same scenario is going to happen to them if they lose the transaction. So they, in general, like to work with what's at hand to save time and energy. Now, on a $20,000, $30,000 foundation problem, you simply negotiate potentially if you want to take some portion of that or all of it, depending how everyone feels and what the motivation for the transaction is, and incorporate that maybe in a reduction in price. The point is the contract, once again, allows for that. So you have a number of choices. You have a number of ways to handle the inspection process. And I'm going to cut it off here. I could go on forever. I see I'm at 19 minutes already and let you go. But I just want to emphasize something, and that is that one thing you should do is separate the inspection aspect from the price aspect of your transaction. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, what I mean by that is that when you went through the negotiation phase for the price of the home, there's a lot of emotion that is spent. There may be people that thought, I'm not so sure I did the right thing. I'm not so sure I paid the right price. That's a separate issue. Try not to throw that in conjunction with the inspection process. They really are two different variables, and whether or not you paid the right price is a different subject altogether than what the actual inspection results are. Because the truth of the matter is that the inspection process is a small portion of what your overall goal is, and your overall goal is to get a home. So if the inspection is outrageously expensive, chances are you probably can negotiate the price at that time. But if that's not the case and your inspections are what we consider pretty normal for a house, depending on the age of the house, try not to let those emotions overcompensate for the actual price that you paid. Because the hardest thing to do in a transaction, because there is so much negotiation going on, and it's tough to not get emotional about every aspect of it, truly we understand that, is to lose the long-term goal of actually getting a house. Because most of what happens during that escrow period, and I'm not talking about just the inspection, but a lot of other emotions, matter nothing after the transaction is closed. You will forget about most of all the emotion that you spent on the house within a month or two of actually getting the house. And that's the goal. Work as hard as you can to get the house. I'm not suggesting you overextend your sense of value in getting a house, but I am saying that try to put in different categories where your emotions really are spent for your long-term goal in getting a house. Okay? So that's my sermon for the day. No questions. Nobody apparently wants a coffee bean card. So I'm going to make another suggestion here. Where am I? Okay, this one. I'm going to talk just before we go up the air once again about the Fournier app. It's an app that allows you to take a picture of any house in America and get the value of that house, market analysis of that house. It gives you the status of any house in that general area right on a map. It tells you the open house availability of those that are actually listed. It gives you the schools. It gives you, I believe, plot maps, past sales, all that with just taking a picture right on your phone. We're going to give you the link right after the broadcast. It'll be right underneath this particular broadcast, and we hope you download it and use it. I don't know why people don't use it. They really should. Maybe it's a habit thing or something. But there are so many different apps. There's so many different websites that are out there that do these things individually, where if you just download this app and take a picture, you get it all in one package. So take a look at the video that I created for this and download it. It is absolutely free. And more importantly, wherever you are and you take a picture, if you have a question about what you just took a picture of and you're looking through the information, you can actually talk to us directly right on the app itself and ask us a question, and it's real time. In other words, you get a hold of us right away, and we're excited to answer any questions about that. So again, if you're thinking of buying or selling in the next few months or even year, or you're planning 2 years from now to buy or sell, we're happy to talk with you. We're happy to sit down with you and take the time to give you a roadmap and to give you strategies on how to buy your next home or how to sell your next home. We're located here in Los Angeles, California. We cover most of LA. We're specific in the beach areas, Manhattan, Hermosa, Redondo, El Segundo, Torrance, Palos Verdes. We've worked all those areas. We've additionally worked Beverly Hills, West Los Angeles. We've gone as far as the Valley and as far south as Surfside. So we have a great deal of knowledge about the LA area. Happy to talk to you about it anytime. Okay, so that does it for me. We'll see you next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Excuse me. Bye-bye, everyone.